The roar of the crowd, a joyous, surging, almost primal wave of sound, was abruptly, savagely pierced by a scream. A child's scream, high-pitched, razor-sharp, with undiluted terror. It was followed almost instantaneously by a sickening, guttural thud and a collective, horrified gasp from those standing nearest the source. The vibrant, kaleidoscopic colors of the HOA Festival's grand procession, the shimmering, iridescent silks, the elaborate, undulating dragon puppets, the flower-laden, intricately carved floats, seemed to blur and distort before my eyes, a dizzying, nauseating swirl. My daughter Maya, who had been standing right beside me only a heartbeat, before her face alight with pure, unadulterated wonder, as she leaned lightly on her brightly decorated forearm, crutches was gone. In her place, a dark, jagged, terrifying opening in the ancient pavement, a storm drain, its heavy, ornate metal grate, inexplicably, horrifyingly missing. Panic, cold, absolute, and utterly paralyzing, seized me in its icy grip. One moment she was there, a tangible warmth, her infectious laughter mingling joyfully with the festive music, her small hand briefly reassuringly touching my arm for balance as a particularly flamboyant sequined lion dance troupe shimmied aggressively past. The next only empty space, and that horrifying black waiting maw in the sun-drenched stone. We were supposed to be safe here. This was meant to be a haven of joy. I was David Tran, the newly appointed Chief of Public Event Safety for the historic city of HOA. This festival, this intricate, vibrant tapestry of joy tradition and meticulously planned logistics, was under my direct watch, my responsibility. And my own child, my precious Maya, had just vanished into the city's dark, unseen underbelly. The past few months had been a relentless, exhausting whirlwind of meticulous planning for this, the undisputed jewel in HOA's rich cultural crown. For Maya now, a bright, inquisitive 10-year-old, events like these were a vital lifeline, a vibrant connection to the world. Born with a rare congenital condition that significantly affected her mobility, requiring her to use crutches for any extended movement, she nonetheless embraced life with a fierce, unyielding joy. The vibrant, chaotic, life-affirming energy of Vietnam's myriad festivals fueled her spirit, painting her world in bright, hopeful colors. We'd moved to HOA 2 years ago, after my beloved wife, her mother, passed away after a long illness. We were hoping the city's profound ancient heritage and its purportedly slower, more contemplative pace of life would be a healing balm for us both, a gentle space to grieve and rebuild. Here, in this city of emperors and poets, I was known primarily for my professional role in ensuring these large-scale, complex public events ran smoothly, efficiently, and above all, safely. It was a responsibility I took with the utmost seriousness, a solemn vow I had made to myself and to the community. Mrs. Lan Pham, however, had been a persistent, exquisitely dressed thorn in my side throughout the arduous planning stages. A woman of considerable, almost feudal local influence, owner of a highly lucrative silk export business that had been in her family for generations, and the formidable head of the festival's powerful and often autocratic Cultural Heritage Presentation Subcommittee, she moved through life with the unshakable, armor-plated conviction of her own inherent superiority. Her obsession with aesthetic perfection was legendary, often bordering on the outright tyrannical, creating ripples of fear and resentment amongst her subordinates. Mr. Tran, she'd declared with icy precision at the final tension-filled pre-festival briefing, her voice like chilled, expensive perfume, smooth yet capable of inflicting a sting. It is absolutely paramount that the procession route maintains an air of pristine, uncluttered elegance at all times. Her gaze, cold and appraising, had flickered meaningfully towards me, a silent, pointed, and unmistakable reference to my daughter Maya, who often accompanied me on my late-night site inspections, her small crutches clicking softly on the ancient stones. No unsightly obstructions, Mr. Tran. No impediments whatsoever to the visual harmony we strive so diligently to achieve for our distinguished international guests and esteemed dignitaries. The implication was clear and chilling. Her animosity towards me, and by extension towards Maya, had escalated subtly but unmistakably in the weeks leading up to the festival. A few days prior, during a smaller, more intimate preliminary lantern procession held within the ancient atmospheric walls of the Imperial Citadel. Mrs. Pham had publicly and loudly admonished a young, nervous junior volunteer. The volunteer's transgression, allowing Maya to rest for a brief moment on a low, moss-covered stone bench situated near her subcommittee's meticulously, almost obsessively arranged display of priceless, hand-painted silk lanterns. Those crutches are a distinct and unacceptable tripping hazard, Mrs. Pham had exclaimed, her voice sharp enough to cut through the murmur of the crowd, loud enough for several bystanders and local media to hear clearly. And they, frankly, quite significantly, detract from the delicate artistry and profound cultural significance of this carefully curated scene. Kindly remove her and them at once. I had intervened immediately, my voice calm but unyielding, my anger carefully suppressed. I reminded Mrs. Pham in firm but respectful tones of the city's stated commitment to accessibility of the laws regarding public accommodation. Her perfectly made-up face, a mask of serene composure, had tightened almost imperceptibly, her dark eyes glittering with a barely concealed venomous resentment. Later that same day, I discovered through a dismayed junior staffer that the specially designated, clearly marked accessible viewing platform near the main stage, a prime spot I had personally secured and vetted weeks in advance for individuals with mobility challenges, had been regrettably but unavoidably reassigned due to unforeseen last-minute logistical requirements by none other than Mrs. Pam's influential subcommittee. No alternative, no apology had been offered. It was a deliberate, calculated slight. And now this nightmare, the grand procession, the culmination of months of effort, was at its vibrant, pulsating zenith. Elaborate towering floats depicting heroic scenes from Vietnamese legends and folklore glided slowly, majestically past, surrounded by hundreds of graceful dancers in vibrant, shimmering audeas. The air was thick, almost intoxicating, with the mingled scent of burning incense, exotic spices from nearby food stalls, and the sweet perfume of countless flowers. The rhythmic, hypnotic beat of traditional drums pulsed through the very stones of the street, a heartbeat for the entire city. Maya, undeterred by the earlier snub, her spirit resilient as ever had been, utterly thrilled, her eyes wide with awe and delight. Her grip on her flower-adorned crutches was surprisingly steady as she absorbed the overwhelming spectacle from a spot we'd found near the curb, slightly less crowded than others, offering a good vantage point. Mrs. Pham's own much-vaunted award-winning float from the previous year, a colossal, intricately carved phoenix with shimmering articulated wings of pure gold leaf, was just approaching our position. It was a breathtaking creation, a testament to craftsmanship. Mrs. Pham herself, regal and imposing in a deep purple, heavily embroidered silk aodai, walked slowly beside it, her expression one of intense, almost manic concentration, as she meticulously directed the large team of sweating men, maneuvering the massive, unwieldy structure through the narrow, crowded street. Her eyes darted, constantly scrutinizing every detail, every movement. She seemed wound tight as a drum on the verge of snapping. It happened in a horrifying, surreal instant. Maya, perhaps leaning a little too far forward to get a better look, past a particularly tall, oblivious spectator, or maybe the rubber tip of her crutch had simply skidded on a loose, uneven cobblestone. Whatever the precise cause, she wobbled precariously, her balance momentarily, fatally compromised. She was still several feet from the float itself, posing no real danger to its structure or its progress. A minor stumble easily rectified. But to Mrs. Pham, already wound to a fever pitch of anxiety and obsessive perfectionism, it was apparently an intolerable imperfection, a grotesque flaw in her carefully orchestrated masterpiece. "You are a roadblock, child. An obstruction." The words, sharp, cruel, and filled with an astonishing venom, cut through the festive din like a whip crack. Before I could react, before anyone could fully process what was happening, Mrs. Pham, with a shocking, almost violent burst of uncharacteristic movement, seized Maya by the arm. She didn't just push, she didn't shove. She lifted my daughter, small and light for her age, especially without the grounding weight of her crutches, fully beneath her, and with a visible grunting effort, swung her small, fragile body towards the open, waiting storm drain beside the curb, and dropped her, deliberately, unflinchingly. Time seemed to stop to coagulate. The music, The cheers, the laughter, the very pulse of the festival. All were brutally silenced, extinguished by Maya's piercing, terrified scream as she plunged headlong into the suffocating darkness below. The heavy ornate grate, which should have been a solid barrier, was simply not there. My training, my years of ingrained crisis management, the countless drills and real-world emergencies took over a cold, efficient mechanism, overriding the primal roar of a father's consuming terror that ripped through my soul. Even as that raw, animalistic sound tore from my own throat, I was moving. Maya! I lunged desperately towards the gaping drain, simultaneously shouting into the radio, clipped securely to my shoulder, my voice raw, cracked, yet imbued with an undeniable urgent authority. Code, red procession. Halt all units, halt medical and rescue to Sector 4. Imperial reviewing stand coordinates, Baker Niner, now child in a storm drain, repeat child in a storm drain. The festive, joyous atmosphere of the HOA Festival shattered in an instant, replaced by a chaotic maelstrom of confusion, rising fear and dawning sickening horror. I dropped to my knees beside the gaping black hole in the pavement, the fetid stench of stagnant water, decaying refuse, and raw sewage hitting me like a physical blow, making me gag. Maya, can you hear me, Maya? It's Daddy's here. My voice was hoarse, trembling. A faint, terrified whimper, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, echoed up from the oppressive darkness. She was alive. Thank God she was alive. Using my radio's surprisingly powerful built-in flashlight, I peered down into the abyss. It was deeper than I expected, at least 8, maybe 10 feet. A straight drop onto what looked like a concrete bottom littered with debris. Maya was huddled at the bottom, a small crumpled figure covered in filth. One of her brightly colored crutches snapped jaggedly beside her, the other completely lost in the muck. She was crying, a desperate, gulping, hysterical sound that tore at my soul, ripping it to shreds. Hang on, sweetheart. Hold on tight, I'm coming down for you. I yelled, my eyes already scanning the immediate vicinity for the nearest access ladder, a sturdy rope, anything I could use. My highly trained event safety team was already converging on our position, their faces grim, their movements swift and professional. The massive parade, a river of color and sound, moments before had ground to a chaotic, disorganized halt. Music sputtered into an unnerving silence. Performers and spectators alike were staring in stunned disbelief, their faces masks of confusion and horror. Then Mrs. Pam's voice, high-pitched and strained, attempting to project an aura of calm and control over the rising tide of panic and outrage. Oh, heavens, the poor dear child. She must have slipped. It's so terribly treacherous with these ancient cobblestones and the sheer crush of the crowds. One must be so exceptionally careful in these conditions. She was dabbing delicately at her forehead with an expensive lace-trimmed handkerchief, her eyes wide, with a theatrical, unconvincing display of profound concern and shock. A few of her committee members, those closest to her, began to echo her words, murmuring about accidents and uneven paving. I straightened up slowly, my entire being vibrating with a cold, contained, and utterly lethal fury. I walked towards her each step, deliberate, measured. The crowd, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the dangerous current now flowing between us, parted instinctively, creating a narrow path. Slipped. My voice was deceptively quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the surrounding noise like a shard of obsidian. I saw you, Mrs. Pham. These people... I gestured with a sweep of my arm to the horrified, now accusing faces around us, many of whom were already holding up their smartphones, their cameras recording the unfolding drama. They saw you too. You lifted my daughter, my disabled child, and you deliberately, callously threw her into that open drain. Her carefully constructed composure wavered just for an instant. A flicker of genuine animal fear finally entered her cold, calculating eyes. Now, Mr. Tran, she began, her voice, losing some of its patrician assurance, becoming slightly breathless. I understand you're upset naturally. It's a terrible, terrible accident. But you mustn't make such wild, unsubstantiated accusations. It's libelous. Her husband Min Pham, a portly man known for his sharp business acumen and even sharper legal team, was now pushing his way through the crowd towards her, his face a thundercloud. One of Mrs. Pam's long-suffering assistants, a young woman named Anne, who I'd noticed often bore the brunt of Mrs. Pam's displeasure, suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling, but clear. I saw it too, Mr. Tran. Mrs. Pam. She was angry about the girl being near the float. She said the girl was ruining the aesthetic line for the judges. Anne's eyes darted nervously towards Mrs. Pam, who shot her a look of pure venom. Min Pham reached his wife's side, placing a proprietary hand on her arm. Enough of this nonsense, he boomed, his voice accustomed to command. My wife is distraught. This is clearly a tragic mishap. We will of course cover all medical expenses for the child. He exuded an air of someone used to problems simply disappearing with the application of money. This parade, I announced, my voice now ringing with the full, undeniable weight of my official authority, overriding Min Pham's attempted intervention, is officially suspended until further notice. All units secure your sectors. Maintain crowd control. Then I locked eyes with Mrs. Pam, ignoring her husband entirely. And you, Mrs. Lan Pham, I stated each word, precise, deliberate, are under arrest for aggravated assault, reckless endangerment of a minor, and public violence with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. The shockwave that rippled through the assembled crowd was palpable, a visible tremor. Mrs. Pham recoiled as if physically struck, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of outraged innocence. Arrest me, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You work for the city. You are a mere civil servant. You can't just... I am Lan Pham. I am David Tran, Chief of Public Event Safety for this city. I stated clearly, my departmental badge now prominently displayed, clipped to my shirt. And more importantly, I am Maya's father. You harmed my child. You endangered hundreds, potentially thousands, with this reckless, violent act. You created a public panic. You will be processed according to the law. Uniformed police officers, already an integral part of the event security detail, were pushing their way through the crowd, their expressions grimly professional, their movements efficient. I nodded towards them, my gaze unwavering. Take her into custody. Min Pham began to protest, loudly, threatening lawsuits, political repercussions, but the officers, recognizing my authority and the gravity of the situation, were unyielding. The rescue operation itself was swift and efficient, a testament to my team's training, though every single second of it felt like an agonizing eternity to me. My team drilled for every conceivable emergency, every possible disaster scenario, had Maya out of that fetid, stinking drain within minutes, using a lightweight emergency ladder and a harness. She was terrified, bruise-soaked in filthy, stagnant water, and her left ankle was twisted at an unnatural, sickening angle. But miraculously, wonderfully, she was conscious, her frightened eyes seeking mine. I cradled her gently in my arms, murmuring reassurances, pressing a kiss to her grime-streaked forehead, my heart aching, with a love so fierce, so protective, it was a physical pain in my chest. The highly skilled ambulance crew was already there, their movements calm and practiced, as they gently, expertly assessed her injuries, their voices soothing. As Maya was carefully, tenderly loaded onto a stretcher, her small hand clinging tightly to mine, my attention returned with cold fury to Mrs. Pam. Her husband, Min Pham, a man whose impeccably tailored suits and quiet, almost scholarly demeanor concealed a well-known reputation for ruthless, often predatory business dealings, was still attempting to intervene. He was speaking in low, urgent, threatening tones to the arresting officers, name-dropping influential politicians, hinting at dire consequences. But they were, to their credit, unyielding, professionally stoic. In the ensuing days, as Maya began her slow recovery in the hospital, a badly fractured ankle requiring surgery, severe bruising across her back and legs, and a deep-seated emotional trauma that I knew would take far, far longer to heal, the official police investigation began in earnest. Mrs. Pam, under sustained intensive questioning by seasoned, cynical detectives, initially maintained her innocence with a haughty, indignant air. She stuck rigidly to the tragic accident narrative, embellishing it with details of the treacherous, uneven cobblestones and Maya's unfortunate lack of balance. But the sheer, overwhelming number of eyewitness accounts, many of them supported by damning, crystal-clear cell phone videos capturing her deliberate, shocking actions, made her position increasingly laughably untenable. Then came the calculated, manipulative shift in her defense strategy. This was the first insidious layer of the truth, a carefully crafted performance. And the young assistant who had bravely spoken out at the scene was approached by Min Phamb's lawyers with a substantial severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. She tearfully refused, but the attempt to silence her was noted. Mrs. Pham, however, during a later interrogation, broke down. Not with genuine remorse for Maya, not with any discernible empathy for the terror she had inflicted upon a child. Instead, she unleashed a torrent of theatrical self-pity, a veritable flood of carefully curated woes. Her family, she claimed through dramatic choking sobs, had poured their entire fortune, their very reputation, their whole future, into their spectacular new float for this year's festival. It was an unbelievably ornate, jewel-encrusted, fire-breathing dragon, rumored to be the most expensive, most elaborate float ever created for the historic HOA Festival. It was, she wailed, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, their one and only chance to win the coveted, prestigious National Heritage Trophy. Winning this trophy, she explained, would secure a life-altering, multi-million-dollar international sponsorship deal from a panel of incredibly influential, discerning international VIPs. These VIPs, she emphasized, were present at the parade, meticulously judging the entries, their decision holding the key to the Pham family's future prosperity and social standing. Maya, that child, she was so perilously close to the dragon's delicate undercarriage. She cried, her voice thick with fabricated despair. The mechanisms, the new animatronics, they are so incredibly delicate, so sensitive. If she damaged it even slightly, if there had been any imperfection, any disruption to the judge's view at that critical moment, we would have been utterly ruined, finished publicly humiliated once more. She then alluded vaguely, but dramatically, to a previous public business failure, a financial catastrophe and social humiliation that had apparently haunted her and her husband for years. This spectacle, this magnificent float, was to be her grand redemption, her triumphant return to the pinnacle of HOA society. I panicked, she insisted, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. I didn't mean to hurt her truly. I just needed her out of the way, instantly, before she cost us everything. Her performance, though transparently self-serving to me, was apparently convincing enough to sway some segments of public opinion, particularly amongst those who admired her family's naked ambition, or those who feared their considerable local influence, or perhaps those who simply preferred a tidier, less monstrous explanation. The narrative began to circulate, insidious and persistent Mrs. Pham, a pillar of the community, a woman under immense, unbearable pressure, driven to a single regrettable moment of madness by the overwhelming fear of catastrophic failure and public disgrace. It was a carefully constructed, lawyer-approved defense designed to portray her not as a malicious monster who would harm a disabled child, but as a desperate, flawed woman who had simply tragically snapped under intolerable stress. But I knew with a cold, unshakable certainty in the pit of my stomach that there was more to this story, much more. The inexplicably missing drain grate, my own preliminary safety inspection report signed and dated, showed all grates in Sector 4, including that specific one, had been present, secure and locked down just hours before the parade commenced. Someone had deliberately removed it or systematically loosened it. It wasn't an oversight. It was an act of sabotage or preparation. And Mrs. Pam's reaction, her shocking, swift, brutal efficiency in disposing of Maya, it wasn't just panic. There was something colder there, something more calculated, more chillingly purposeful. And her almost fanatical, obsessive focus on her float the way her eyes had darted around nervously as it passed not just at Maya, but at the crowd at the rooftops. During one of my visits to the hospital, Maya, still heavily sedated but lucid for a few moments, whispered something. Shiny things. In Dragon's mouth, Daddy. Lady was showing a man, a bad man, near the black hole. Her words were disjointed, fragmented by trauma and medication, but they sent a chill down my spine. Shiny things, bad man, black hole was clearly the drain. Had Maya seen something she wasn't supposed to see? An exchange. I want that dragon float impounded immediately and torn apart inch by painstaking inch. I told the lead detective on the case, a grizzled seen-it-all veteran named Inspector Bao. And I want a full comprehensive forensic workup of the entire area around that specific storm drain, including any and all security camera footage from nearby businesses, private residences, anything that might have overlooked the parade route in the minutes leading up to the incident. Inspector Bao raised a skeptical eyebrow but nodded slowly. The Pham family has very deep pockets and exceptionally long arms in this city, Chief Tran. This will undoubtedly stir a hornet's nest of considerable size and venom. Let it stir. I replied, my voice hard as granite. My daughter was nearly killed. I want answers. The discovery, when it finally came after days of meticulous, painstaking forensic examination, was even more shocking, more audacious than I could have possibly imagined. The magnificent prize-winning dragon float, a breathtaking marvel of artistry and complex engineering, was also, it turned out, a masterpiece of ingenious criminal concealment. Within its hollow, ornately carved belly, hidden behind cleverly disguised false panels and intricate, seemingly functional gearings, investigators found not just the complex animatronics that made its eyes flash and its jeweled scales shimmer. They found something else entirely: dozens of small, exquisitely carved, antique jade amulets, priceless gold hairpins, and ancient ceramic figurines, each carefully, professionally wrapped in layers of protective silk and custom-fitted foam padding. They were Inspector Bao, confirmed grimly, his face pale, a near-perfect match for a list of priceless, culturally significant artifacts reported stolen from several provincial museums, pagodas, and heavily guarded private collections across central Vietnam over the past 18 months. A string of unsolved high-profile thefts that had baffled authorities. This was the second, far more sinister, far more disturbing twist. The National Heritage Trophy, the lucrative international sponsorship, the esteemed panel of international VIPs. It was all an elaborate, brilliantly conceived charade, a smokescreen. Mrs. Pham and her seemingly respectable husband Min were not just ambitious social climbing entrepreneurs. They were, it appeared, at the very heart of a sophisticated, highly organized, and incredibly ruthless artifact smuggling ring. The HOA Festival, with its teeming crowds, its inherent chaos, its constant movement of large, elaborate, unsearchable structures, provided the perfect, audacious cover for their illicit operations. The prize money, had they won, it would have been a convenient, easily explainable way to launder a portion of the substantial proceeds from their illegal sales on the black market. One of the so-called VIP judges, a shady foreign art dealer with a documented history of dealing in antiquities of questionable provenance, was quickly identified as their primary international contact, their buyer. He had vanished from his hotel hours after Maya's incident, the loosened drain grate. It was now theorized it might have been a pre-planned emergency drop point, a hasty contingency plan, perhaps for a small, particularly valuable item, if they suspected surveillance or if a deal went sour. Or perhaps more chillingly, a way to dispose of an informant or a problem. Mrs. Pham's reaction to Maya might have been triggered by Maya getting too close to a prearranged signal or exchange with an accomplice in the crowd near that drain. Maya hadn't just been an inconvenient roadblock to a perfect photo opportunity or a threat to a delicate float mechanism. She had entirely inadvertently blundered perilously close to the operational heart of a major criminal enterprise at a critical moment. Perhaps, as she'd indicated, she had seen a quick, furtive exchange near the dragon, near that open drain. Mrs. Pham's violent, impulsive act of shoving Maya into that dark, filthy hole wasn't just about protecting her float's pristine appearance or her social standing. It was a desperate, panicked, brutal act of self-preservation, an attempt to silence a potential witness to protect her entire criminal empire from sudden, catastrophic exposure. My daughter, my innocent child, had inadvertently stumbled into the deadly path of a desperate, cornered criminal. The city of HOA, a city that prided itself on its deep cultural roots and its moral integrity, was rocked to its ancient foundations by the burgeoning scandal. The festival, the vibrant symbol of its rich culture and proud, resilient heritage, was now irrevocably tainted by this dark undercurrent of greed, corruption, and shocking violence. I called a joint press conference with the chief of provincial police, a man I respected who had pledged his full support. The room was packed to overflowing with local, national, and even some international media, the air thick with anticipation, speculation, and a sense of profound civic shock. I first addressed the brutal assault on my daughter, detailing Mrs. Pam's callous, calculated actions, my voice tight with barely suppressed emotion, but resolutely controlled. Then, with Inspector Bao beside me, I laid bare the full, astonishing extent of the Pham family's heinous crimes. We presented the damning, irrefutable evidence of the smuggling ring, displayed photographs of the stolen artifacts recovered from the Dragon float, and outlined the web of corruption that had apparently reached deep into the heart of their beloved, cherished festival. The faces in the room, seasoned journalists, grim-faced city officials, respected community leaders, registered profound shock, then a wave of palpable collective outrage. During the chaotic question and answer session that followed, Min Pham, who had unexpectedly shown up with his lawyer, attempted to shout down my accusations, calling them lies and a personal vendetta. He was swiftly escorted out by uniformed officers, his desperate bluster only serving to further incriminate him in the public eye. One of Mrs. Pam's subcommittee members, a mousy woman named Mrs. Dew, who had always seemed terrified of her boss, suddenly fainted in the back of the room, later providing crucial testimony about suspicious late-night meetings at the Pham warehouse. The fallout was swift, decisive, and far-reaching. Mrs. Lan Pham and her husband Min, along with several key accomplices, including the now fugitive VIP judge, who was apprehended months later trying to cross a border with a fake passport and a briefcase full of cash, were indicted on a raft of serious federal charges: aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, large-scale theft of cultural heritage, international smuggling conspiracy, money laundering, and engaging in organized crime. Their considerable assets, their silk business, their opulent villa, their luxury cars, their hidden offshore accounts, were seized by the state. Their carefully cultivated, decades-old reputation for civic pride and business acumen was shattered, reduced to rubble overnight. The festival, of course, was suspended immediately, its future hanging precariously in the balance, a deep wound in the city's heart. The legal proceedings were protracted, complex, and sensational, dominating headlines for months. But the evidence against the Phams and their network was overwhelming, meticulously compiled. Mrs. Pham, faced with irrefutable proof of her crimes and the grim prospect of spending the rest of her life in prison, eventually, after weeks of defiant silence, turned on her husband. She provided a detailed, chilling confession, implicating Min as the ruthless mastermind behind the entire smuggling operation, a man who had used her ambition and her fear of their shared past failures to manipulate her into complicity. Both received substantial, lengthy prison sentences. The stolen artifacts, thankfully, were mostly recovered and painstakingly returned to their rightful places in museums and pagodas, their cultural sanctity restored. For Maya, the road to recovery was long, arduous, and painful. The physical injuries, the broken bones and bruises eventually healed, though she would always walk with a slight limp, a permanent reminder. But the terror of that day, the feeling of falling into darkness, the memory of Mrs. Pam's face, lingered stubbornly in her young mind. Nightmares were frequent, terrifying visitors. Her trust in the world, once so open, so bright, so innocent, was understandably deeply shaken. But Maya was a fighter, possessed of an inner strength that continually amazed me. With intensive therapy, with the unwavering, unconditional love and support of our friends and family, and with the astonishing, heartfelt outpouring of love and support from a community deeply ashamed and profoundly shocked by what had happened in their midst, she slowly, bravely began to heal. Her bright spirit, though bruised and battered, was not and would never be broken. The city of Hue embarked on a difficult, painful period of introspection and institutional soul-searching. The festival, when it was finally tentatively reinstated a full year later, was a more subdued, more reflective affair. But it was also, in many ways, a more meaningful one. There was a new, palpable emphasis on transparency, on accountability, on community integrity, and on ensuring such a profound betrayal of public trust could never ever happen again. New, far more stringent safety protocols were implemented across all public events, many based directly on my detailed post-incident recommendations. A new civic award was even introduced by the City Council, the Maya Tran Award for Courage, Resilience, and Community Spirit. Its first recipient, fittingly, was a group of brave young local university students who had helped expose a minor ticketing scam at a local concert, demonstrating vigilance and civic responsibility. David Tran, once just the quiet, somewhat grieving widower, the diligent chief of public event safety, became for a time an unlikely symbol of integrity of justice and of unwavering paternal devotion in the city of Hugh. But my greatest, most profound reward was not public accolades or professional advancement. It was seeing Maya smile freely again, without reservation, without the shadow of fear in her eyes. It was watching her at the revived Reborn Festival, not as a victim, but as a celebrated guest of honor, her flower-adorned crutches, now symbols of her undeniable strength and resilience. Her eyes once again sparkled with the pure, unadulterated joy of the celebration, her laughter echoing through the ancient streets. She even agreed, after much gentle persuasion, to present the award named after her. Her voice was small but clear, strong and steady, as she spoke with simple eloquence of the importance of kindness, of courage, and of always looking out for one another, especially those who are vulnerable. A small faction of fam loyalists, and those whose own dubious dealings had been peripherally exposed by the scandal, continued to grumble in the city's tea houses, suggesting I had exploited my daughter's unfortunate accident for personal gain or to settle scores. But their voices were increasingly isolated, their credibility shattered. The city, for the most part, had chosen a different path. The darkness of that terrible day, that horrifying moment by the storm drain, would never be entirely forgotten. It was a scar on our family and on the city. But it had, in its own terrible, violent way, dragged a hidden, festering darkness into the harsh, unforgiving light, ultimately purging the city of a cancerous wound it hadn't even known it possessed. And for Maya and me, it had reinforced with fire and terror the unbreakable precious bond between a father and his daughter. A bond forged in profound love, tested by unimaginable terror, and ultimately against all odds, gloriously, resiliently triumphant. The vibrant historic colors of Hugh seemed brighter now, its timeless music sweeter, its rich ancient heritage even more precious. Precisely because we as a family and as a community understood with a new hard-won clarity the constant vigilance, the unwavering courage, and the profound compassion required to protect it all.